Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Richard Masso. I'm the Vice President and General Counsel at CIJA, the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, and thank you very much for being here tonight. On behalf of CIJA, I would like to thank the Jewish Federations from across the country for their support for this important event and this very, very timely event. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to, of course, acknowledge the shooting at Toronto's Temple Emmanuel earlier this week. It is a shul I davened in. It is a shul I spoken at. It is a shul whose spiritual leader, Rabbi Deborah Landsberg, is a personal friend of mine. So my thoughts and the thoughts of the community is with that synagogue. I'm also want to mention the anti-Semitic vandalism that took place 10 minutes from where I am here in Montreal last night, where Jewish businesses were vandalized in a hateful manner. Sadly, this is not new to our community. We all know all too well that when tensions rise in the Middle East, we feel it at home. The Jewish Security Network and the community security networks are advising the community to exercise heightened vigilance and awareness at this time. Local police departments across the country have publicly and privately stated that they are stepping up police presence in our communities, and we know for a fact that it is true. We encourage everybody to exercise a healthy vigilance. If you see something, please say something. Please report concerning activity to police without delay. And your second call should be to the local Jewish community security in your region if it is available. And this is all important because we're all in this together. So, at a time where Iran's Islamic regime poses a heightened danger to Israel and to our Jewish community worldwide, we must remember that it is and has always been a grave danger to the Iranian people themselves. For nearly 50 years, this regime has brutally oppressed the Iranian population. Over the past 2 months, the barbarity of the regime has been clear for the world to see. It has murdered tens of thousands of people. It has repressed its population, people who just wanted to see change in their country. But that regime is also a serious threat to the Iranian diaspora, including Iranian-Canadians. At this critical moment, it is crucial that our Canadian Jewish community and the Iranian-Canadian community, come together to support one another. Our communities share strong bonds of friendship that go back centuries. Many in our Jewish community have joined pro-freedom Iranian-Canadian-led rallies across the country, where hundreds of thousands of people have peacefully demonstrated, Canadians from all backgrounds coming together in the hope of a brighter future for the Iranian people, free from the brutality of the Islamic regime. And I cannot help to know the difference between the toxicity that we saw in the last 2.5 years in anti-Israel demonstrations and the dignity and the peacefulness of the Iranian pro-democracy demonstrations that we've been seeing. This, in and of itself, says a lot. Tonight, we have the opportunity to hear from voices from within the Iranian-Canadian community. Like our own, like the Jewish community, the Iranian diaspora is diverse, and we have to respect this. So I want to begin by making it clear that this is a nonpartisan and a non-political discussion. It is an opportunity to listen to leaders of the Iranian-Canadian community to hear how they're doing, how they are navigating these challenging yet these promising times. To hear directly from them about the danger of the Islamic regime truly means from people who themselves or whose families have lived under the shadow of the Ayatollah and the RGC. And also to hear about the promise of a brighter future for their families and for the Iranian people. So it is my honor to introduce those three distinguished panelists. The first one being Nazanin Afshin-Jam is a woman who I'm lucky to have known for more than 20 years. She's an award-winning Iranian-Canadian human rights and democracy advocate and just all around a fantastic human being. Kaveh Shahrooz is a lawyer, a pro-human rights advocate, and a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. I got to know him recently. I've seen him testify at Parliament, where his testimonies were always impactful and clear, and very educational for people who wanted and still want to know more about the situation in Iran and in Canada. And Ghazal Shokri, a new friend of mine, also an impressive Iranian-Canadian community leader, a democracy advocate, and a very brave woman as well. So here's what I suggest. Each panelist will have the opportunity to speak, telling us their story, after which we will move into the Q&A portion of the evening. And what we'll do, so the questions that will be posed, I have used the questions that you sent, you, the audience, have sent. There are hundreds of questions that were sent to us. We use them as a basis for our questions tonight. But you still have the chance, if you want to, in the button downstairs that there's Q&A. If there are questions that you want me to ask, please put them there. I will do my very best to get to them. I don't guarantee it because it's impossible. But please, if you have questions, don't hesitate to go there, to put them there, so that we focus on the questions and the issues that you, the audience, want to know more about. Okay, so now, starting with you, Nazanin, can you tell us a little bit about your personal story, who you are, where you come from, and how you got to get involved in the pro-democracy movement here in Canada?
Merci, Richard. C'est un grand plaisir de te revoir. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Howard, and all of you at CIJA for organizing this webinar, very important one. And I would like to share my sympathy to your community following the shooting of your temple this week in Toronto. It's alarming for us all, and I suppose we share common pain and grief. And for many years, we have shared a common enemy, the regime of the Islamic Republic, which has caused so much hardship to both our communities. So by way of background, in 1979, my parents opposed Khomeini's Islamic Revolution. My mother's family were monarchists. My grandfather served in the Shah's army, and my father was the general manager of the Sheraton Hotel at the time. And at that time, no one knew what the new Islamist rules were. So he continued to allow mingling between men and women, drinking at the hotel, dancing. And these were all forbidden under the Islamist rules. So one day the Revolutionary Guards burst in. He was jailed. He was tortured with lashes to his back. And my mother was able to make some phone calls that got him temporarily released. But of course, he wasn't going to wait around. And while his colleagues were being executed, there was no rule of law at that time. Judges were just sentencing everybody to death. So as soon as his wounds healed, he was on the first plane to Spain. And a year later, when I was 2 years old, we immigrated to Canada. I have never taken my freedoms and opportunities for granted. And I can tell you that democracy is very fragile, and we in the Iranian community know all too well how easily it can be taken away. My Iranian heritage is something that I've always held dear to my heart. And as I got older, I learned more about what's happening in Iran under this regime, particularly for women. That got me very interested. In 2005, I learned of a teenager on death row in Iran. Her name was also Nazanin, and she was sentenced to death because she had stabbed one of 3 men that tried to rape her. So that propelled me to start a campaign to try to save her life. It was a year-long campaign, and through much international pressure, many meetings around the world with European Parliament, Canada, petitions of over 350,000 signatures, and obtaining great lawyers for her inside Iran. With all the pressure, she was finally released. But there was a problem the next day. Well, just to go back, she is now free and she's fine and she's married with 4 kids. But the problem was I learned of 160 other children on death row, and that propelled me to start the Stop Child Executions organization to try to put an end to executions of children, and been advocating since that time more recently during the Woman Life Freedom Revolutionary protests in 2002. I've been working full-time as an advocate and trying to focus on bringing freedom and democracy to the Iranian people, and facilitating and organizing a network of 100 Iranian diaspora groups and 200 other very active opposition members. We were meeting monthly. And until this very day, I work with Iranians from right to left of the political spectrum, from monarchists to the left to everybody in between, including ethnic and religious minorities, the LGBT community, and anyone really who believes in a free, secular, democratic Iran, the rule of law and human rights. I'll stop there unless you have a follow-up question, and I can continue on.
In and of itself, it could be a book or a movie. Thank you for sharing that with us, and Nazanin. Thank you very much. Kaveh, why don't you tell us a little bit about your own journey?
Sure. Thank you so much. It's not fair to follow Nazanin. I just want to thank you, Richard, and thank you so much to the folks at CIJA for organizing this. It's really an honor to be with you. And for those of you that are in the audience, if you have family in the Middle East, I hope that they're safe. Though I regret to hear that even if your family is here, they could be under threat. And much like Nazanin, my sympathies and solidarity with the Jewish community. My story is one of, regrettably, my story is all too common, and it has elements of tragedy in it. I was born shortly after the Iranian Revolution, and my first memories really are of war and repression. So shortly after I was born, the Iran-Iraq War started, but Iran was also undergoing a period of that can really only be described as a reign of terror. It was right after the revolution, and the Islamists were consolidating their power, so they were basically targeting anybody that they could, and this affected my family immensely. Many members of my family were arrested. Probably the person that suffered the most in my family was my uncle. My uncle was a 19-year-old when he was arrested for selling newspapers, and like a lot of other people, he was subjected to a 5-minute trial, if you can call it that, and sentenced to 10 years in prison. And
for selling newspapers.
For selling an anti-government newspaper, yes. Oh. And my earliest memories are of going to visit him in prison with my grandmother and my mom. This was my mom's brother, and it's not a good childhood when you are being taken to prison once every couple of weeks and seeing torture marks on your relative's body. My uncle regrettably had been tortured so badly in prison that he lost use of some of his limbs. And then, he was serving a 10-year sentence. And after 8 years of that 10-year sentence, Iran's regime decided to carry out a massacre of political prisoners, basically. So everyone that had been put in prison, even some who had finished their term in prison, they were brought back before these tribunals, these death commissions, that as they came to be called. And they faced really one or two questions, literally one or two questions. The few people that managed to survive them tell us that, decisions were made in a matter of seconds, really, whether or not somebody would go to the right and live or go to the left and hang. And I'm sorry to say that my uncle was sent to the left and he was hanged. And to this day, we don't know, where his body is buried. We don't know sort of exactly the date of his execution and so on. And that was an incident that, as I said, regrettably, first of all, far too common. Far too many people I know have a story like that. But it was also something that really, shattered my family. I don't think my mother ever recovered from the loss of her brother. My grandmother never recovered from that. But it also sparked something in me. Shortly thereafter, we moved to Canada, and I grew up in Toronto. I went to school here. I eventually went to law school in the US. And while I was in law school, I decided to investigate this massacre a little bit more. And at that point, I had to make a decision. If I wanted to keep going down this path, it meant that I really couldn't go and visit my family anymore, because if I wrote something and I published it, that would mean that I would get in trouble. But I pushed ahead, and I sort of wrote more about this massacre, which unfortunately hadn't, even though it was very widespread, it hadn't really been written about. And that was the beginning of my life of activism. So aside from practicing law for the past I don't know how many years, 20 years or so, I've been very active in trying to bring attention to the horrors that this regime has unleashed over its 47-year life. The world is beginning to know more and more about this regime now, but for the first couple of decades of its life, a lot of these killings, even though Iranians knew about them, the international community didn't pay attention. And among the things I've done, I don't want to sort of list the resume here, but one of the things that I'm very proud of is that I spent quite a few years on social media and also in writing, trying to illustrate that there is regrettably kind of a network that has taken roots in the West. And I came to call them the Iran lobby, of academics, of folks in the NGO sector, folks in think tanks who either, I can't demonstrate that they were necessarily paid by the Iranian regime, but they certainly acted like lobbyists for the regime, and they whitewashed the crimes, and they tried to push the narrative of the Iranian regime into Western discourse, and they tried to normalize Iran's regime. And what I tried to do was try to make this connection between what they were saying and what the regime was doing. And I think it was instructive for quite a few people in the West that followed my work, for them to hear that they were being lied to, basically, by a lot of so-called thought leaders. And I think what you've seen in the last few years with the Iranian people rising up and saying, we don't want to reform the system, we don't want to fix this system, we actually want to get rid of it entirely, is finally the true voice of the Iranian people coming through. They're sick and tired of living with this, with this theocracy. What they yearn for, what they want to live under, is a system. And I don't think they're demanding too much. They want to live under a system like the one we live under, which is free, in which there is equality of genders, equality of religions, in which there are opportunities for you to advance regardless of who you are. Iran, regrettably, has a lot of challenges before it, and these days, as it goes through war, every time I turn on the news, my mind rushes back to when I was a child, and I was seeing scenes of war, but I genuinely do feel, there's a lot of risk here, but I genuinely do feel that this is a moment of hope. This is a moment where something better can be built, and we need all the allies we can get. And I'm so glad that we're having an event like this where folks with Iranian background and friends from the Jewish community can talk together, and we can learn that we have so much in common. We can work together, and we can really build a much better Middle East once the Islamic regime is gone.
Thank you, Kaveh. And we'll explore many of these themes in the Q&A session. Thank you for sharing. Ghazal, we had coffee in Toronto a few months ago. You told me a little bit about your story, but I'd like, if you would, I'd like the audience to also hear it. Who's Ghazal, and why you're here tonight?
Sure. Thank you so much, Richard, and everyone organized this event. Actually, as Kaveh mentioned, it's not fair to talk after Nazanin, then it's not fair for me to talk after Nazanin and then Kaveh. Then because of some vision issues I have, I'm sorry if there are some I have some discomfort in my eyes, but please bear with me. Actually, first, before I begin, I want to acknowledge the frightening incident that took place earlier this week at a synagogue in Toronto. My thoughts are with the community and with anyone who felt shaken or unsafe because of it. No community in Canada should have to feel fear simply because of who they are or what they believe. Moments like this remind us how important it is that communities stand beside one another. I'm speaking to you tonight as an Iranian-Canadian, someone building a life here in Canada, while constantly worrying about the people I love who are still in Iran. For many of us in the diaspora, life over the past few years has developed a strange myth. You go through your normal day here, work, conversations, meetings, but in the background, your mind is somewhere else because you are waiting for a message from home. Sometimes it arrives quickly. Sometimes a full day passes. Sometimes 2 or 3 days go by with nothing. And often the silence is not accidental. During protests, during repression, and now during the current crisis, the regime does something very familiar. They simply shut down communication. Internet disappears, messaging apps stop working, phones go silent, and suddenly millions of people are cut off from the outside world. Families cannot reach each other. Friends cannot check on one another, and the uncertainty becomes overwhelming. So you keep checking your phone, and eventually, sometimes hours later, sometimes day later, a short message appears. I'm safe. 2 words. But those 2 words carry the weight of everything. Because until that message arrives, you don't know if someone has been arrested, caught in unrest, unable to move safely, or simply trapped in silence created by the regime itself. This is the quiet reality many Iranian families live with today. I grew up in Iran in a system where propaganda was part of everyday life. Every morning at school, my generation and the generations after us began the day by chanting slogans like "Death to Israel" and "Death to America." I still feel uncomfortable repeating those words today, but I share this story because it shows how early the regime begins shaping narratives. Children were not the target, minds were. Authoritarian systems understand something very clearly. If you can create enemies and divisions, you can keep people distracted long enough to stay in power. And this is something I often say within the Iranian community itself. Iranian society is incredibly diverse, ethnically, religiously, politically. That diversity should be a strength. But the regime has spent decades turning those differences into fractures, encouraging suspicion, encouraging mistrust, encouraging communities to see each other as threats. Division has been one of its most effective survival strategies. One of the things I experienced after coming to Canada more than 11 years ago was something very different. Living here allowed me to actually know members of the Jewish community, not through propaganda or headlines, but simply as neighbors, colleagues, and fellow Canadians. And when those human connections exist, the narratives authoritarian regime tried to build began to collapse. Because what becomes clear very quickly is that our communities have far more in common than those systems ever wanted to us realize. Both communities understand the cost of extremism. Both understand how dangerous authoritarian ideologies can become when they go unchecked. And both understand that protecting human dignity requires people to stand together. Canada gives us a framework for that. This country is built on values that are simple but powerful: respect for human rights, pluralism, equality before the law, and the belief that people from different backgrounds can still share a common civic life. Those values matter because they allow solidarity to grow not from politics, but from principles. And that solidarity matters not only here in Canada, but also for the people still living under repression in Iran. For many Iranians, the hope for the future is actually very simple. A country where no child grows up chanting hatred, a country where women are equal, a country where minorities are protected, a country where disagreement is not punished with prison, and a country that can live peacefully with its neighbors and with the world. The path to that future will not be simple, but the connections being built between communities like the one represented here tonight are part of what makes that future possible, because division is how authoritarian regimes survive, but solidarity is how people overcome them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ghazal. Powerful words indeed. Thank you to the three of you for sharing those opening remarks. I'll go to the questions. As I'm going to say again, you feel free to put questions here. I am seeing here some question. I'll get to them, but question to each of you. Please make it short, maximum 2 minutes. Kaveh, like you did say something about the regime lobby. We'll get to this in a few minutes. But one of the things that we're hearing a lot in the media and on the streets and among politicians is that, on the one hand, a lot of people are saying, "Well, we know this regime is bad. We know that it is problematic for the Iranian population, for the region, for Canadians, and for the world." And on the other hand, they say, "Well, but at the same time, it's up to the Iranians themselves in the streets to take care of that, to make it fall, make the regime fall." But that has been tried in the past. Many attempts to go on the streets and fight for democracy peacefully have failed. So how do we answer those people who, on the one hand, say, "Well, the regime is bad," but in effect are saying, "Well, there's nothing we can do, and let the Iranians deal with that"? Kaveh, on this, please.
Yeah, what I would do in the face of that question is just to ask the simple question of how. How do you propose doing this? What method have the Iranian people not tried that you would propose that they try? Starting in the year 2000 and for many years thereafter, Iranians tried, and I was actually not very much in favor of this movement, but frankly, Iranians went through this process, and it was an important one. They went through the reform process. They said, you know what, we can work within the system, we can vote in elections, we can bring in relatively more moderate believers in the system, and they can work within the framework posed by the Islamic regime, and they can fix it. Nothing came of that, because anytime there was even a slight movement forward, it was crushed. And anytime, people even try to elect somebody relatively moderate, and when we say moderates, I mean, we're not talking Democrats here, we're talking just slightly less bad. That election in 2009, for example, was stolen, and people took to the streets and simply said, "Hey, count my vote, where's my vote?" And they were crushed. Subsequently, they've risen up in other ways, they've resisted, and they've been crushed at every turn. And your audience here will know that just a couple of months ago, they rose up in record numbers, and they were brutally put down in almost unspeakable terms. So what is a population like that to do? Well, naturally, they will look to the outside world for support, and that's what they're doing. You also hear a lot of people say, "Well, we ought to try diplomacy." Well, we've tried diplomacy, and every time we've tried diplomacy, the Iranian regime has cut a deal or bought itself some time, and it's taken money from the international community and funneled it to Hamas and Hezbollah, and it's stolen that money. Diplomacy is useful, but only insofar as it actually produces results. But we've seen that it doesn't produce results. So the question that I would put to them is how. And regrettably, I don't think they have any answers. We have arrived at this moment. Nobody likes war, but we've arrived at this moment because there simply is not an alternative.
Thank you, Kaveh. Nazanin.
Yes, well, everything that Kaveh said, I concur. Iranians have tried everything, and they've wanted to do everything on their own. They've tried to make incremental changes inside Iran, as Kaveh said, with reform, only to take 2 steps forward under a reformist president and then 3 steps back the following election with a more hardline leader. And of course, we have the consistency of a supreme leader who is hardline to begin with, extremist Islamist leader. So it doesn't really even matter what kind of presidency you have in place. And as Kaveh said, there's been many rounds of protests, the student protests in 1999, the Green Movement, the Bloody November, Woman Life Freedom in 2022, and now whom many call the Lion and Sun Revolution. In the diaspora, we've tried everything, a meeting with world leaders, only for them to continue to shake hands and do diplomacy with these illegitimate regime leaders. I've been back and forth to the UN, many reports later, collecting dust and no real meaningful change, or at least not big enough and fast enough to tackle these urgent and massive problems like preventing a massacre. As Kaveh said, we just saw tens of thousands slaughtered in just a few days. Some are saying there was over 30,000, but it could be even triple that amount. We're still collecting the numbers and the names. 300,000 people were injured in just those 2 days when there was the internet blackouts, and over 50,000 detained. So Iranians will finish the job, but they only needed a little help from their friends. They needed people to understand the responsibility to protect and what that norm actually means. When a country is killing its own people, who are they to turn to? When the UN's mechanisms are flawed and dictators have veto power, who are the Iranian people to turn to? When the international community has not had the moral courage to act, what should the Iranian people have done? It is a grassroots movement started by the Iranian people, but they welcomed intervention to weaken and cripple the regime and take out their oppressors so they could finally get back their country and at least have a chance to build what they've been dreaming for the past 47 years.
Thank you, Nazanin. We'll go back to that very last point of yours in a second, but Ghazal, why don't you weigh in here?
I'm going to provide a short answer because most of the things I was going to mention, Kaveh and Nazanin covered as I was on some of those protests, for example, on Green Movement, at least 3 million people on the street on one of them, and silent actually protest, because showing the civil type of the protest we were doing. But on top of that, as they all covered very well, I'm going to say one thing is going around inside Iranian community. You can't remove a regime came through same type of revolution and protesting with the same method. We can do the same strategy to them. Then they have gone through it 47 years ago and they know everything. Then this is one of the another reasons on top of everything we have to consider.
Thank you. Nazanin, going back to your points about the dreams of Iranians. So the three of you are Canadians, proud Canadians, very involved in Canadian civic life. And Ghazal, in your introduction, you mentioned Canadian values. So what in building the future that you want from for Iran, what in your Canadian experience and now your Canadian DNA would you like to bring to Iran to say, this value is something that, of course, the situation is different. Canada is not Iran and all of that. But what are the values, the principles that you like to that are applied here or used here that you like to see in Iran? Nazanin, then Kaveh, please.
Thank you, Richard. Exactly the same things that we want here. And what brings actually our Iranian community together are our values. The whole opposition is united on their love of Iran and Iranians, their rich culture, their past, their food and poetry, their warm generosity that's unmatched anywhere in the world. And they're united in that they all want an end to this bloody, child-murdering, gender apartheid regime. They want what we have here: freedom, democracy, the rule of law, and human rights. They all want free and fair elections to choose who they want at the ballot box, where that they basically want everything that we've ever dreamed of here. And they tasted a lot of this before the 1979 revolution. And so I think that they're aiming for these values.
Thank you. Kaveh?
Yeah, I'll point to a couple of things. One is this notion of equality before the law. Nazanin just very sort of casually said, this gender apartheid regime, and we, use that phrase and move on. But people don't often stop and think about it. Iran is actually an apartheid, and I think it's a double apartheid regime. Women in Iran, under the law, this is not just cultural practice, this is written in the law. Women are not equal to men. They are actually a lower class of people. Baha'is in Iran, which is a small religious group, they are non-people under the law. Their religion is not recognized, and therefore they have no legal standing of any sort in Iran. So certainly, I think the value of equality before the law and equality under the law, this is incredibly critical for a future Iran. And this is something that I've sort of been raised with in Canada, and I think is critical for the future Iran. And the second thing I would mention is that this, in Canada, we've learned compromise. This is a country founded on 3 founding nations. We've developed a system whereby these different interests are they work their problems out, and they arrive at solutions. And now, increasingly we have a multicultural society in which people from all over the world come, and they have different interests and different goals. And we figured out a way that no one can get everything that they want all the time, but there's a compromise system where everybody kind of gets something, and there's a certain set of rules that dictate that. And Iran is a very diverse place, and ultimately, I think that value of compromise, that value of live and let live, is something that I think a lot of Iranians aspire to, and a future Iran would really benefit from.
Thank you. I'd like to switch gear a little bit, talking about some of the threats that we're seeing. Kaveh, first to you. Can you provide us some insight on the threat of the regime to Iranians in Iran now? And now that there's a military action, has that hampered the repression by the regime, or has that made it worse?
To Iranians inside the country,
Yes.
So Iran's regime is an enemy of its own people. Its interest is in robbing the country, filling their own pockets. It's in advancing an Islamist agenda. So that means that they push terrorism all across the world. Their relationship with the population is really one of enemies. And I began by talking about my own experience and the massacre that happened in Iran. This was by no means a unique incident. Massacre after massacre has happened. Leftists have been targeted. Religious groups have been targeted. Authors and journalists have been targeted. And now with this war situation, already with the uprising that happened in January, there was this fear that of the 50,000 people that have been detained, many of them will be executed. And now, the regime is openly telling people that if you come out in the streets, if you take any action against the government, we are going to deem you as working with the enemies of state. So I think the situation in Iran is going to get much, much worse until this regime falls.
Thank you. Nazanin, Kaveh addressed the situation of Iranians in Iran. I like to talk about the threat to Iranian Canadians. You've been vocal, and we've heard from people such as you, brave people, vocal people, that the Iranian lobby or agents or sympathizer are intimidating pro-democracy voices in the world, including in Canada. Have you yourself felt on the threat, and how does a threat that this regime how can it extend, or how can it reach out to Canada? We're a nation that we have law enforcement, we have intelligence services. How can they be active, and what can be done to fight them off?
Yes, unfortunately, Richard, I have had direct threats to my life. I continue to receive online threats, and I pay very close attention to my surroundings when I travel. I pan the room, the streets. I take different routes when I'm driving from school with my kids back home. It's a reality that a lot of us activists face. And it doesn't just apply to activists. Regular Iranians are very fearful, even just attending protests. That's why sometimes you see people covering their faces because they'll be harassed and intimidated back home, or their families will. The police, RCMP, and CSIS have recorded our concerns. How much gets investigated behind the scenes, I'm not sure. But to give a related example, my husband, who was the former Minister of Defense and Minister of Justice and Foreign Affairs in the Harper government, was running for leadership of the Conservative Party. And despite our family getting threats with targets placed over a picture of my children on their faces, the RCMP said they could not look into the matter because he was no longer a sitting MP. We had to talk to local police, and despite the person giving a description of a gun and what day they were going to use the attack, the police had a person of interest but didn't take it seriously. And then not too long after, this person was arrested for a triple homicide in the murder of his mother, grandmother, and brother. So police, and we need to do more in terms of directing police activity. And just a few days ago, when it was announced that Ayatollah Khamenei was eliminated, a well-known activist in our community who organizes a lot of the rallies lately, he's a boxing champion and owns a private gym in Toronto. His gym was targeted with 17 bullets. And shot 17 times. And there's another activist in Vancouver who frequently wrote about the regime on his social media, and he's now missing. And the homicide unit in Vancouver is currently investigating, and they think there's some suspicious activity there. And then there's two other female activists recently, one in Toronto in the US, who have strong social media presence, and they've now had bounties placed on their heads. And this is because of this extremist Islamist ideology that's getting propagated from Iran to the world. And they have access to a lot of money, and they launder this money here. In fact, transnational repression is a real thing. Irwin Cotler, as we know, has 24-hour surveillance because of being a target. The Hells Angels were even hired in Canada to carry out an assassination plot on a couple in Maryland, Washington, Iranian background. And we know of Masih Alinejad, a very prominent activist, and she's had 3 or 4 death attempts on her life. She lives in New York. So it's scary, and it's real, and we have to do something about it.
Thank you, and I'm sorry again that the community is going through this. It shouldn't be like that.
Well, your community knows all too well, as you receive all this as well. So we really sympathize in this pain and fear.
Well, we're in the same boat, absolutely. Ghazal, some of the people who are pro-regime are very openly supporting the regime here in Canada. For the last few years, for example, there's been that all could stay that was created by the regime years ago. And we see during that time, during those demonstrations, and some of them happened at Queen's Park in Toronto, the flag of the Islamic Republic being flown. And it's coming up again in a few short days, where terrorism, extremism will be almost celebrated. What does that tell us? What does that tell Canadians in general about the presence of supporters of that murderous regime in our midst?
In 2 words, Canada is being safe haven for them.
Wow.
They are like a few years ago. The guy who was in charge of enforcing hijab, the police commander, was the commander of the group, was enforcing hijab on the streets, found on the treadmill on a gym in Richmond Hill. Then when I was on the Hill a few months after, I was telling one of the MPs, what do you think I have to feel as a woman who got beaten on the streets of Tehran for my hijab, for not wearing proper hijab? And now that guy the commander of those who were beating us here in Canada. And there are lots of examples like that I can bring for you. Like these guys are freely living on the Canadian soil and their families and money laundering, while Iran is in a very huge economic problem. My loved ones, they are all financially suffering. And their kids and their families are living here in a very expensive mansions in Vancouver, in Toronto, and all over the Canada. Or even it was a report I personally was watching, and was a report about the tourism in Montreal. And suddenly I saw the Minister of Health, the former Minister of Health of Iran, was walking around the Montreal. And it came on the news, and it made a big actually news about it. Then the doors of Canada is that wide open to those guys.
Wow. It's pretty much pretty incredible. Kaveh, going back to you. So we talked about the threats to Iranian Canadians, what Nazanin called transnational repression. You talked about the dangers to Iranians in Iran, and Ghazal mentioned the influence of and the presence of Iranian agents here in Canada. What are the threats to Canadians in general, beyond the Jewish community, beyond the Iranian community? What concretely are the risks that the presence and the activities of those bad actors present to Canadians?
Yeah, I think what's important to understand, and I think the Jewish community understands this, the Iranian-Canadian community certainly understands it, but I think that maybe our wider Canadian family often misses this, is that the Iranian regime, obviously, they have a particular problem with Iranian Canadians, they have a particular problem with Jews, but really their primary enemy is the West. I mean, they dislike our way of life. And I think Canadians need to take that threat much more seriously. These aren't just words that they say. This is a mindset. And I think Iran's regime has carried out attacks everywhere in the world. Their attacks are not just limited to Israel, for example. They've carried out attacks in Argentina. They've carried out attacks just about any place in the world that you can think of. They've killed people and dissidents in foreign countries. This is a national security concern. This is something that can create serious instability in Canada. So if we're not careful about the folks that we're letting into the country that might have ties to the regime, we are putting the lives of every Canadian at risk because they can bring violence to this country. The Iranian regime, by admission of our own security agencies, is trying to wreak havoc via foreign interference, via electoral interference, via online creation of just disinformation and creating just confusion among our electorate about what's going on. There are bad actors in the world, Iran certainly being one of the leading bad actors. And I really do think, regrettably, that too many Canadians, we live in this peaceful country, we think we're immune from it, but we're not. These evil governments like the Iranian regime want to do us harm. And unless we wake up, unless we take these threats seriously, they are going to harm us.
Thank you. Question to both Ghazal and Nazanin, starting with you, Ghazal. We are 4 days away from International Women's Day. And Kaveh mentioned the treatment of women in Iran. What can you tell us about the repression of women in Iran from your perspective, and what would a brighter future for the women in Iran be under if Iran was free? Ghazal and then Nazanin.
Yeah. Again, let me give you an example. I'm coming from an atheist family, and at least not religious family. I was studying engineering, but I was accepted to a type of university. I have to wear chador, like that long black earrings women put on them, and this is a repression. A girl going to university to study engineering has to wear that type of earring. But I'm really proud of new generations, Generation Z, and even the generations after them, as the whole world heard their voice in women life freedom movement. They kind of I can say there was a renaissance, that there was a renaissance over the decades, but that was the turning point. The whole world heard, and then I didn't have the chance, as Kaveh said, when we walked through this path of activism, I couldn't go back home. I haven't seen my mom for 4 years and the rest of my family, but the videos and pictures and my sister, I'm talking to my sister, I see there is another country from the scenery, but for sure, for the government, for the rules, still the same, but they are fighting. They are very resistant. And I believe whatever happens, even if like the foreign countries were not supporting, whatever was not provided, I believe still the female of Iran would change and would fight until into the day of the freedom and democracy.
Thank you. That's very inspiring. Nazanin?
Well, I don't have the lived experience that Ghazal has, but of course, having done this kind of work for the past 23 years, I've learned a lot about what women face in Iran. They are literally treated as second-class citizens, where they are legally valued as being half of a man under the law. And that includes their testimony. So if you were in court, you would need double the amount of women as the same as a man. Women can't sing or dance on the streets. They can't ride a bicycle. They can't go to a stadium and watch a football match. They're not allowed to get certain jobs. They're not allowed to become a president, for example, or judge. I don't know if you had heard of Nobel Peace Laureate Shirin Ebadi, but before the revolution, she was a judge. And when the revolution happened, they took away her title and she was able to practice as a lawyer. Of course, laws are very discriminatory towards women, whether it's a marriage, custody, inheritance. And if I think what it would mean if this regime fell, it would just mean that women could breathe again and exercise their full agency. They could feel human again and being valued as equal partners and not as sexual objects. And it's not because of their male counterparts who are very much liberalized in thought. It's really the repressive regime's laws that have been enacted. So the laws lag far behind the norms. So what I would like to see is our sisters and feminists and men around the world to recognize this plight of Iranian women. Women in Iran are very strong. They come from a long history and lineage of female Persian warriors. So they have that strength in their DNA from the time of Cyrus the Great, where they held ministerial roles. They led armies and navies into battle. And this carries on to this day. And they are the ones, as Ghazal said, they sparked the Woman Life Freedom Revolutionary Movement in 2002 when Jina Mahsa Amini was killed for not properly wearing her hijab. She was beaten on the head, and 3 days later she was in a coma, and that's what sparked that revolution. And they continue to play a huge role. We needed our women rights groups and activists then, and we continue to need them to put an end to this gender apartheid regime.
Well, I can only say from a French Canadian men here, if the Iranian women are like both of you here, like if they're empowered to live to the fullest of what of the talents that God has given them, like there's nothing that can stop Iran to become what it was once,
You're right,
a great civilization.
Sorry, I was going to say, they've proven themselves. They've proven themselves on the outside of Iran when they're given those rights. There's the first female astronaut. There was the top prize in math, in science prizes. They've really proven themselves. And if they're given that freedom, it's, watch out, world, what Iranian women are going to do in a future-free Iran.
Absolutely. Two last questions, because I see the time is running out. The first one, and I'm just going to ask the three of you the same question. Please keep your answers short. Is what would you like the Canadian government to do now regarding the current situations? I'll start with Kaveh, then Ghazal, and then Nazanin.
Well, to start with, I'd like the Canadian government to have a coherent policy position. It's unclear sort of where we stand on this. Prime Minister Carney said one thing a few days ago, and now there seems to be some confusion about where we stand. I'd like Canadian policy to be that, you know, we no longer recognize the legitimacy of this regime, and we stand with the Iranian people in wanting a democracy. That's to start with. But really importantly, you know, we've been talking about transnational repression. We've been talking about these folks that come to this country and threaten us. It's really important for our government to take that threat seriously. Canada has become, as Ghazal said, it's become a safe haven for regime officials. I think one of the most important and helpful things the Canadian government can do is identify regime officials here, properly fund our security agencies so that they can go after them, deport them, and ensure that no new regime officials get into the country.
Thank you. Ghazal?
I know Nazanin and Kaveh give the answers everyone expect, and I'm going with some personal answers and answer for those like immigrants like myself. I want Canadian government to be more kind with the immigrant activists from Iran like myself, and be more harsh on those regime agents and those who, because I see lots of them coming here easily, having their families here because they have huge monies in their account. But middle-class families like me, I'm going through tough time to even have a couple weeks visitor visa for my sister.
Okay, thank you. Nazanin?
Get unmuted here. Of course, the best solution is for Canada to help rid the world of this regime, the biggest state sponsor of terror in the world. And so I hope they help support the Iranian people with this change of regime. I was pleasantly surprised at first when Mark Carney said he supported the U.S. and Israel's mission to rid, the nuclear and missiles of the regime. I was disappointed when he backslided. We need more than words of condemnation. We need tangible action. To protect Canadians, we need more than just listing of the IRGC on the terrorist list. We need the enforcement part, which means more resources to actually make that happen. Stronger training for our border services, more police and agents investigating these regime affiliates and tips on and having like an access to a tipping line, or monitoring the money that's being laundered. Just to echo on something that Ghazal was previously saying about it being a safe haven, there was a global news interview investigation, and they found that there was over 700 regime affiliates here. So for regime officials, they can identify them and not do more than just deport them. Canada can enact their universal jurisdiction and try them and hold them accountable, which will act as a deterring effect. And lastly, generally supporting Iranian civil society projects so that the Iranian people can finish the job in Iran when they finally do take to the streets and, take back their country. And then just on the Iran side of things, Canada can even help with non-military things like providing tech, Starlink, humanitarian aid, supporting other allies to put pressure on the UK to list the IRGC. There's a lot of different things we can still do in Canada.
Thank you. Thank you. Last question, and then some closing remarks by me. The question, and we're going to where we started. There was a lot of discussion about allyship, and that's in your preliminary remarks. That's also the question that we got the most often earlier today, is that people of the Jewish community are asking you, what can we do? What can we do to help? How can we support you? Actually, that makes me proud to be a member of the Jewish community, because it came through that they really want to be there by your side. So I'm going to go Ghazal, Nazanin, and then Kaveh. Ghazal.
I believe knowing each other, and as I mentioned at the beginning, is like knowing each other, uniting with each other, making dialogues. And in another meeting I have with a Jewish woman arranged from the Vancouver, I said, like, doing shared projects, common projects, can help to know each other and unite better. Then my suggestion is, let's define some projects and work together.
Thank you. Kaveh.
I think events like this help a great deal for us to, voice our concerns and tell each other our stories. I think, there's been incredible support of Iranians at our protests by the Jewish community, and I welcome that, and it's so moving to see. Yeah, I mean, I think those are really key things. I mean, I think the expressions of solidarity, we have the same enemies. We really just need to connect with each other a little bit better, work more closely together, use each other's resources and talents. And I think we can build incredible things working with each other.
Thank you. Nazanin.
I think actually out of all the communities, the Jewish and Ukrainian communities have been our closest friends in the past years and have done a lot of work. I think just the typical stuff, joining our rallies, signing our petitions, helping us with advocacy, helping connect us to people with influence that can support the overall movement. Sharing your lessons learned in your community, because I see how connected and unified you are. So we would love to learn some of these tips from you. And I think, we've already been supported a lot by some of our Jewish friends and partners, connecting us to media and to members of parliament. And I think if there's that continued relation of trust, we can do a lot more together.
Thank you. Thank you. Listen, I've been in this in and around politics for years, first as a member of parliament and then in Jewish advocacy, and it can leave someone blasé. I have to tell you that this session tonight really inspired me. The three of you are inspiring human beings. You are leaders that I'm glad to call friends, that the Jewish community is lucky to have as friends. Please know that we are, as a community, with you in your struggles. We will, and those are not just words, we will work together to make sure that our future, our common future is bright. So thank you. To the audience, thank you very much for being here. It was, as you saw, it was a very important event to be at. Please look out for an action alert that we will be sending you to send messages to the government of Canada to protect Canadians from the very real threats that you heard about tonight. We will continue to host different webinars. If you have ideas for webinars, write please at info@cija.ca. We want to make sure that you are as informed as you can be, and that we tackle the issues that you want to tackle. Again, also thank you to the Jewish Federations for their support for this event. And I wish all of us a brighter future, a freer future, because we all deserve it. So again, to our panelists and to all of you, thank you and good night.